Hi, we continue today in Genesis 23 as part of our journey through what I'm calling transition tales. As you can see here from this little chart of the section between 22:20 and 25:18, between the binding of Isaac and the beginning of the Jacob story. So we've already seen the announcement of Milcah's and Nahor's children, which sets up Rebekah, but not Laban, curiously, as we saw, and now we're in the midst of this negotiation to purchase the cave of Machpelah as a burial place for Sarah and for Abraham and for Isaac and for others as the generations go by. And as we're looking at these scenes, we looked last time at this quote from Sarna and from Sternberg about some of the challenges that Abraham faces in seeking to get this property from the Hittites. And as I was noting in the last video, Sternberg is simply one of the best at being able to read these kinds of passages. And he's primarily a literature professor and not a biblical scholar, but it's his work on the poetics of the Bible that had really transformed almost 40 years ago how people read and really introduce narrative criticism, which is the main way I'm entering into these stories, by paying close attention to the details. It's interesting to me how some scholars have suggested he's quote-unquote over-reading the story, but Sternberg shows so carefully the details that are either in the story or what he calls, and we'll be working at today, gap filling, which is the way that the text and the writers leave all kinds of open spaces for audiences to imagine and fill in. The Midrash, of course, traditionally has done that, and it comes from its own perspective, but any reader has to fill in some things as we go. For instance, as we move from verse 4 that we looked at last time to verse 5, where Abraham is speaking here to the Hittites, how are we supposed to imagine this scene? Where is this taking place? Is it in the city? We don't know that it's in a city. We'll find out a little later that all the people who enter the city by the gate are present or responsible for this, but it doesn't mean they're at the gate, and we haven't heard that yet. So we'll find that later, and we may lead us to go back and read it again. But at this moment, we know nothing about it. And when he says to the Hittites, as we see here, how many? 5? 50? A representative sample? All of them? How many would all of them be? Men, women, and children, like the people who surround Lot's house in Genesis 19 in Sodom? We know nothing about that. And so he's coming up to speak to them, and we also don't know anything about the timing. Does he have an appointment? Do they know he's coming? Do they know about Sarah's death? Or are they just going about their daily business in a city, and a stranger, an alien, as he self-describes himself, walks in and demands property from them for a burial place, which is just outrageous. Who does he think he is? And yet, as we'll see, they don't respond with outrage. They don't tell him to get out of town, and they don't accuse him of being an alien like the Sodomites accused Lot of judging them from the disability of not being one of their citizens. Instead, they respond with prose that it takes a Sternberg or other close reader to try to take apart. Because what we're seeing here, as he shows on the right side of my quote here, are the three levels or motives, one on top of each other: politeness, politics, and profits. All secretly alien if not imposed to the imperative of burial. Which is to say, we read it on the level of politeness, which leads some readers to take the politeness level as all there is. So when they say, none of us will withhold or we will give it to you, that why is Abraham arguing about paying the price? Which highlights that readers are taken in by the surface level and are not looking at the deeper levels of politics, which have to do with whose land is this, and who has the right to sell it, or who has the right to live within this land. And of course, that is an issue not only for the Hittites in the story, but for the audience, almost certainly in exile or after exile, where the Ezra Nehemiah perspective, with the support of the Persian government, has established an elite list of who's in and who's not in, and anybody who's married a foreigner, so-called, is out of the new Jerusalem community. So in the face of that, this story is proposing a possibility for how to negotiate with the Canaanite neighbors, in this case the Hittites, not the members of the second millennium BCE empire, but just one of the local tribes as described earlier in Genesis 15 and also in Deuteronomy as simply one of the local indigenous peoples. So he's coming up to them in this context, and we know that it's also the attempt to fulfill, as we saw last time, or in the overview as well, the fulfillment of Yahweh's promise that Abraham would be given land. So although he's not going to be given here land in its most maximal version, from the Nile to the Euphrates, maybe he can get a cave to bury his wife, but it won't be easy, as we'll see. So we have to read very carefully to recognize these levels, as Sternberg leads us to, of politeness, politics, and profits. There's also another level, which is to say the characters in the story know what's happening in ways that we don't. Abraham can see how many Hittites there are, and we can't. He also knows where they are, and we don't. And he also knows who he's going to call upon in just a minute, and we don't yet. So there's a level at which, as I was highlighting in the introductory video, that I think these chapters are purposely trying to confuse readers so that we can feel some of the confusion that the post-exilic audience might have felt in trying to figure out some of these issues at an unsettled time. So with that, we'll enter into our story, and as we do, we'll continue to look at the key words here, and this is where we ended last time, so we're going to see these repeated keywords: burial ground, bury your dead, and other aspects of that. I've also changed this from how I posted it last time, and I'll post the newer version on the webpage, to highlight a connection that isn't using the same words, but is making a classic important point here, which is Abraham twice says, I'm among you, and yet Ephron says the other way around, in your presence. Asking Ephron, in your presence and sitting among the Hittites, in the eyes of my people. So the question is, who's among who? Is Abraham really among these people? These are not, quote unquote, his people. But at this point, he has no people. Sarah is dead, Ishmael is gone, Isaac's gone, and we don't even know about the servant who he's going to send the next chapter where he is. He certainly has him and some servants, but he doesn't have any family alive, at least that we know of here, although he has family at a distance, and we'll see that in chapter 24. So with that, let's begin. In verse 5, already there's some translation issues. The Hittites answered Abraham, and that seems to be a whole verse, but it's not quite, because there's a lo in the Hebrew here, which is a no. So they start off saying, no, hear us, my Lord. And so there's already an argument here, and that's important to paying attention to, because as we'll see, Abraham is going to have to regroup and try again after he deciphers what they're saying here. And again, we have to look at the question of what are we supposed to anticipate is happening. The Hittites answered all in one voice. We know the Hebrew Bible often presents Israel that way in negotiation with Yahweh, as saying Israel said or Judah said, but that's in the stylized version of a conversation with their God. This is a conversation between human beings. So how are we supposed to imagine the Hittites all at once speaking in one voice? Do they have someone who's a representative for them? We simply don't know. But the way it's presented is certainly many against one, and we just simply don't know how many here. So they say no. And as Wenham notes below, the reply is stated in chiastic apposition. Two positive statements, bury and choicest, and two negative ones, none will withhold or prevent from burying. And Westerman also notes below the answer of the citizens of Hebron, which he's making an assumption there that is not evidence in the text. We don't know what city this is. Conveyed by a courteous dignitary, shows respect and readiness to accommodate. And I want to highlight how that's an older view that really doesn't understand the story. It takes a Sternberg reading it through narrative criticism to really see what's going on. And we'll see, and that's the note we see down below. Shorn of its trappings and considered in practical terms, what the Hittites say amounts to very little. And so let's look at that to see. So hear us, Shema Enu, repeated 3 times throughout with different meanings, and that's another Sternberg point. Hear as attention, so hear us as in listen to us. In verse 11 we'll see as obedience, as in the Shema Israel, obey your God, and understanding, do you comprehend what's going on? So playing on the 3 different meanings of the word Shema. So hear us, my Lord, you are a mighty prince among us. And notice what's happening. Abraham came in and played humble. I am a stranger and alien, whether we think of those as 2 separate things, or as we looked at last time, a hendiandus, that could be translated a resident alien, which is to say, I'm residing among you, but I know I'm not one of you. And so I'm a foreigner, I'm an outcast in some levels, and I'm desperate, and I need a burying place, please. But they say, no, that's not who you are. You're a lord and mighty prince among us here. Nishi Elohim, as Westerman says helpfully there, a dignified title meant to overshadow the legal description he had used of himself. Or as Walter Brueggemann notes, a prince of God, suggesting it is the landless sojourner who is God's prince. But certainly they're not seeing it in divine terms. There's nothing about God, Elohim, or Yahweh anywhere in this story, in great contrast with chapter 24, where Abraham's servant will claim Yahweh's guidance throughout as a rhetorical argument point. But here they're saying, so we're negotiating here not with a stranger and alien, but with a mighty prince among us. And they affirm the among us using a different word, and that's why I underlined it rather than color coding it, to say they're affirming the idea, but they're using their language, which is to say he's not going to put words in their mouth. They're going to choose their own words. We can put aside the fact that this story is taking place in Hebrew, and there's no reason to think that the Hittites speak Hebrew. But that's the kind of convention we saw in old cowboy westerns where the cowboys and Indians both spoke English. So to make this text work, it has to do that. In real life, there'd be a real linguistic problem here, and we see, as we see in some other passages, especially in the Joseph story, but that's way later. So here's what they say, and this is where we have to look at it very carefully, and a quick reading misses it altogether. Bury your dead in the choices of our burial places. None of us will withhold from you any burial ground for burying your dead. And to a superficial ear, it sounds like, great, bury your dead anywhere, but that's not quite what it says. And a key point here is that none of us withhold, which is, of course, a double negative there. To say no and withhold is not to say anybody will actually give, but that's not exactly what it says. The none of us is to say what man, which turns it, as my note below, just my own note says, from a collective none to an individual which one, which is to say rather than hearing it as none of us withhold, it could be heard more accurately as what man will withhold from you, and then the answer is going to be Ephron, as we'll see, who will not withhold, as we see. So none of us will withhold here, only here and one other time. A rare word in this chapter that's not a key word, that's not repeated a bunch of times. So none of us withhold from you any burial ground for burying your dead, but they highlight bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. So which is it? Can he bury them anywhere? Or are they saying for a mighty prince and a lord among us, nothing but the best will do? The word here, the choices, is used a couple of times for like best soldiers or best of something else. So it's plainly saying, we're not going to offer you the cheap model here, like you're going into a funeral home and wanting the cheap pine box. We're going to give you the one that's honorable for the kind of status you have. Implicitly, of course, it's going to cost you plenty, but big deal, you're a mighty prince, you can afford it. None of that has to be said out loud here, but it's all implicit, as we'll see. Notice they say, of our burial places. So noting the collective action, and some translators and even some interpreters seem to want to imply modern notions of real estate here, as if property is private property and alienable by individual, but that's not the case here. We don't have to know anything about this specific Canaanite culture to know that plainly the Hittites have collective ownership of collective land, just as the Israelites will understand that Yahweh has given them by the tribes collective land that's not for them to sell. So the only way this land can be sold or given to someone else is to have the complete community support, as we'll see he has. But we're not there yet at all. So which man will withhold from you any burial ground for burying your dead? Leaving open the question here of whether it's you have to pick the choicest or you can pick any one you want. And notice this refrain throughout of bury your dead. So now, with that response, now that the Hittites are saying, pay attention to us, the negotiations can begin, and Abraham starts in again. Having made his announcement, and now he can start. And this will repeat in verse 12, which is why we're stopping at verse 11 today, as we can see in this chart here. We'll get through this section. So Abraham rose, and there's a note below has from Sternberg, and I'm going to put this whole quote up on the screen so you can see it in bigger type here. So Abraham has taken the hint and begins to play the game by the rules of indirection Hittite style. Manner and matter alike convey the adjustment. In terms of manner, contrast the bow with the initial lack of preliminaries. The previous direct and simple syntax in verse 4, give me, as we saw, is replaced with complex and conditional syntax, which we're about to see. From the spontaneity of the mourner to the deliberation of the negotiator, from the bald proper noun the Hittites comes now the expanded the people of the land the Hittites, as well as matter. Abraham's speech betrays not the least awareness, far less resentment, of the equivocation and power play just exercised on him. Whatever the Hittites' secret reasons for preferring a blur to a straight answer, Abraham publicly translates their effusions into a yes, which makes it virtually impossible for them to retreat or demur. So that helpfully from Sternberg, and helping us to elucidate what we're about to hear. So he rose and bowed to them, as he bows to Yahweh in 18:2. But here to the Hittites, and as Sternberg was noting, adding the people of the land, change from verse 3. People of the land can mean two different things throughout the Hebrew Bible, especially in the Deuteronomistic history. It can mean the wealthy landowners, the people who make and break kings, or the people of the land in the sense of the poor farmers, the folks who were left after exile when the elite are returned with Persian support. So it's not clear exactly if it means one group or the other, or if it means all of them, but plainly, since Abraham's interested in land, it's the people who are related to the land. So now he tries again. And as Sternberg notes, to make sense of his discourse is largely to find out what sense he has made of theirs. So as we listen to him, we're figuring out what's in his mind and interpreting what they just said, as well as our understanding what he's saying back to them. So notice the conditional speech that he engages in here, as Sternberg pointed out. If you are willing, so that's the first part, if you are willing. And notice it's only in 1824 previously, next to the similar bargaining context we'll see for a wife in chapter 24. And Sternberg adds here, like other skillful rhetoricians, including his own servant in the next chapter at 24:49, Abraham does not settle for the pale if you agree, but rather opts for a conditional that is equivalent in sense but incomparably superior in deterrent force, one that stigmatizes any non-compliance or quibbling as inhuman, which is to say, he's got his dead wife there, and what kind of people would they be if they refuse? So very clever rhetorical strategy, and part of what Sternberg's pointing out, and this is of course key to the Bible more largely, is the power of carefully chosen language, both within this negotiation in the story, but in the larger frame of the Bible itself, trying to present a vision that would hold a people together, and now running for almost 3,000 years. So the authors are producing precise language in writing the story, and they're producing characters here within the story that are similarly producing precise language. It puts the lie to those who think you can just read the Bible in English and it simply means what it says. It's much more complex and much richer and more beautiful than a superficial reading would allow. So if you were willing that I should bury my dead, but we'll note how that changes in a moment. Sternberg notes here, if you wish to bury my dead, not as careless or timid translators would have it, with the halfway, if you wish me to bury. So that's the point here. In the Hebrew qual infinitive absolute, it's if you wish to bury my dead. So he's suggesting that since it's their land and nobody withhold, they would turn it over to them to do, if that's their will. So if you are willing that you should bury my dead here, noting the refrain, out of my sight or away from my face, as we saw, hear me, and entreat for me Ephron, son of Zohar. And as we read it the first time, we'd suggest he must be somewhere else. But how does Abraham know about Ephron, son of Zohar? That's part of what I was suggesting last time, is he's done his due diligence. He didn't just show up here out of nowhere. We don't know how long it's been that Sarah's been dead, and we don't know how long he was with her. Was he with her before she died, or did he just simply hear that she died? We don't know. But he's had enough time, apparently, to survey the land, to get a sense of the local politics, and to pick Ephron. And not only that, as we looked at verse 9, to have a very specific piece of land involved. Maybe he had his real estate agent survey it for him, or he went on Zillow or something like that, huh? So entreat me here, we'll see repeated in verse 10, and we see that Ephron is there all along. Ephron, son of Zohar. And as Sternberg again notes for us, Abraham takes advantage of their equivocation in verse 6 to name a specific owner and a specific burial location. But I want to take away a little bit of the word owner here, because I think that's overstating it. I want to suggest that what Ephron is a steward or a controller of the land, that the ownership is still collective in the people. But for whatever reason, he's the steward of this particular piece, although that's speculative since we simply don't know. So, as all part of the same sentence, if you were willing that I should bury my dead away from my face, hear me, entreat for me Ephron, son of Zohar, so that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns at the end of his field for the full price. Let him give it to me in your presence as a possession for a burying place. Phew! My gosh, there's a lot going on there, but it's all so specific. And from Abraham's perspective, it can certainly be, do you want anything more clear than that? This is exactly what I want, so do we have a deal or not? But of course, it's only halfway done. So he asks for the particular cave of Machpelah, which is from a root meaning fold or double, either a cave with an inner cave, as Sternberg notes, like the dialogue's inset and frame, or two-storied, like the dialogue's surface and depth. And many scholars have noted that the play on words there is a folded or double one. It can also mean a cave of couples, hence Abraham and Sarah, and then Isaac and Rebekah as well. So the double cave has a double meaning, or maybe even a triple meaning. So the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, or here literally which to which, the Septuagint takes it as ha estin auto, which is his, which is my reason for thinking it's not necessarily about ownership. The Hebrew doesn't say anything about ownership and simply points to Ephron. So the cave of Machpelah at the end of his field, and as Sternberg notes, the apartness of the site in the guise of pleading for its smallness, uselessness, out of the wayness. And Sarna notes a common and obvious means of property identification in land sale documents. But again, I think that's overstating it. There's certainly no land sale document in this situation here. For the full price, let him give it to me, or literally for all the silver. And that puts us in a very interesting connection with 1 Chronicles 22, the retelling version of David buying the threshing floor upon which the temple will be built. So let's just look briefly at this passage, and we can hear the similarities here between this and what we hear in our passage. David said to Ornan, "Give me the site of the threshing floor, that I may build on it an altar to Yahweh. Give it to me at its full price, so that the plague may be averted from the people." Then Ornan said to David, "Take it, and let my lord the king do what seems good to him. See, I present the oxen for burnt offerings and the threshing pledges, etc." But King David said to Ornan, "No, I will buy it for the full price. I will not take for Yahweh what is yours, nor offer burnt offerings that cost me nothing." So David paid Ornan 600 shekels of gold by weight for the site, and built an altar to the Lord there. So what do we have going on there? Certainly Chronicles is going to be later than Genesis, or perhaps at the same time in the Persian period, which is suggest what Abraham is doing here is establishing for the first time the presence of Yahweh's people in the land of Canaan, and what David was doing there in Jerusalem was establishing the foundation for the Jerusalem temple. So two negotiations for land, paying full price in a context where it sounds like given, and certainly the authors of 1 Chronicles and the authors of Genesis 23 are aware of the echoes, probably both ways, but it's hard to know for sure. So, for the full price, let him give it to me. And in English, that makes no sense at all. Now, why would you be giving something for full price? But he's simply not going to use the word sell. That's part of the levels of politeness in politics here. In your presence here, or among us, as we saw, as Sternberg notes again, Abraham takes up their word and position. I myself said with you, and I still mean to remain at the edge culturally as well as topographically. But since you insist, let us put it your way. So in your presence, as a possession here, and as Sternberg notes again, implying a practical or even a political waiver, the land transferred, that is, shall serve no other purpose, so that the restriction of use, burial, compensates for the absoluteness of possession, holding, which is the word at issue here, as a possession. So notice what he's demanded, from a particular person, a specific cave, a specific sense of whose control, where it is, for the price, in your presence, only as a burial place, but I get to keep it. Those are the terms. And now we hear for the first time, Ephron was sitting among the Hittites. Is there a circle and he's in the middle of the circle? We don't know. But here he is sitting among them, or dwelling or abiding among the Hittites, as we see here. Hittites 3 times in the verse, emphasizing the all against one. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing, or literally in the ears of the Hittites, emphasizing even more, of all who went in at the gate of his city. And now we hear that, the whole citizen assembly, as Westermann notes, but it's certainly an echo of Sodom there for the first time. And here we hear the gate of the city, implying for the first time that this is at a city. But contrary to Westermann naming this Hebron, the narrator simply refuses to name this, making it a much more vague situation than if we can picture a particular city. So finally, for now, no, my lord, hear me. I give you the field. And notice change from which he owns and his field, as Sternberg notes again, part of the surface generosity which masks both political and profit motives. Quote, a breach of principle over who owns the land does not come so cheap, and if I am to adjust the status quo for your benefit, you must make it worth my while. So here's what what Ephron offers instead. I give you the field and I give you the cave that is in it. Notice, not at the end of it. So it's now a package deal. You can't just have the cave. I give you the field and the cave that happens to be in it in the presence of my people. I give it to you, bury your dead. So now Ephron's made a counter offer. You can't just have the cave, and he's using the language of give rather than make the ugly profit motive clear that he's trying to extract an extra profit out of a man in a suffering condition needing to bury his wife in an emergency situation. So that's where we'll leave it now, and we'll pick it up next time when Abraham has to respond to the counter offer of the Hittites. See you next time for that.